Welcome, everyone, to the YouTube exclusive version of the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. This time, I'm Jon Macri, and today I'm going over the top 10 IDP takeaways from preseason week 2, now that that's in the books. I've also written up the IDP takeaways from every single preseason game for PFF.com, which I'll link in the episode description for those that want to see beyond the top 10 takeaways. Also, don't forget to use the promo code Fantasy25 to get 25% off your annual PFF subscription. I think we only got 2 more days until that promo code is gone, so get in there now. Nathan Yonke went over the top 10 offensive takeaways from preseason week 2 as well in video form, which you can check out now. And now it's my turn to cover the defensive side of the ball. So let's get right into it, starting with a bunch of linebacker situations. Since last full episode covering 3-down linebackers with Mike Woolert, you guys showed out in a big way. So I've got mostly linebacker takeaways here today, since we know how much you love them. And starting in Philadelphia, Devin White and Zach Bond, who started this game playing every down roles through the first 2 drives of the game. This was the case last week as well, and something that we've been talking about for about a month now. So just further confirmation that this should be the starting duo come week 1. It is worth noting that Nakobe Dean, who's come in with the backups in each of the past 2 games, has played really well. Like, he's currently the highest graded defensive player on the Eagles roster this preseason with a 91.6 defensive grade, which I know it's the preseason and performance here isn't the indicator that playing time is, but for the Nakobe Dean hive, who might still be clinging on to some hope in Dynasty, for example, there's at least a ray of light shining through the darkness that has been his time so far in the NFL. And we'll see if, he can actually play his way into a larger role or not, especially considering, the thinner starters ahead of him, Zach Bond being an inexperienced linebacker, and Devin White having the struggles that he's had in his NFL career. So we'll see if Nakobe Dean actually becomes anything. But come week 1, I'd very much expect this to be Devin White and Zach Bond. So something to keep in mind for your IDP drafts there. Next up is an interesting update to keep an eye on in Baltimore with their linebackers. So Roquan Smith hasn't played this preseason. And in this game, it was Trenton Simpson and Malik Harrison who got the start, both playing every down roles. Now, what was interesting about this was that while both of these linebackers started last week as well, Harrison played exclusively on the edge last week, and he didn't wear the dot. He was seemingly an indicator that he wasn't going to be a threat to Trenton Simpson's LB2 snaps. However, this week, he played all but 1 of his 17 defensive snaps at off-ball linebacker, so really didn't play on the edge at all. And he wore the green dot. So was a bit of an indicator. But he also got the kind of starter rep treatment by being the first one out of the game while Simpson stayed on for 1 more drive. Now, I'm not saying this is, the end of the Trenton Simpson as Patrick Queen replacement or anything like that next to Roquan Smith, but at the very least, it's kind of worth noting where if Baltimore, for whatever reason, feels like they want to lean on their vets a bit more than the younger, more inexperienced Simpson, this could be them giving us a hint, even if I'm still treating this linebacker situation as Simpson being the LB2 based on just the noise from camp all off season long. I just thought it was really interesting in their usage this past week and worth kind of bringing to our attention to see if it continues into preseason week 3. Okay, another AFC North linebacker situation to note. The Pittsburgh Steelers played quite a few of their defensive starters, minus TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, those kind of guys. But Patrick Queen was one of the starters in this game. He played the first 3 defensive drives, which accounted for a whopping 15 defensive snaps. He was the lone every down linebacker of his crew here. Peyton Wilson and a Landon Roberts also played with the first team. Last week it was Roberts and Wilson as the starting linebackers with Queen out. Whereas this week we saw what figures to be more of their typical rotation come the regular season, right? So Peyton Wilson played most of the snaps, and Landon Roberts really only played on early downs slash rundowns. He played 4 total snaps, but that includes the first snap of the game next to Patrick Queen. Peyton Wilson came on after that first snap and still rotated off the field quite a bit, which was, I mean, exactly what we saw in the past few seasons, where the Steelers linebacker 2, whoever it ends up being, is only really IDP relevant in those deeper leagues, since it's just far from an every down role. I'd very much expect this kind of rotation to continue into the regular season. It's great for Peyton Wilson's dynasty value that he is getting those snaps, those IDP or second linebacker snaps for IDP in Pittsburgh already in his career. But for redraft, those types of things, or for 2024, he's not going to be overly useful outside of those deeper leagues. All right, next up is the Los Angeles Chargers linebackers. Obviously, they have a new coaching staff coming in with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter as the defensive coordinator. They also spent up to draft their linebacker from Michigan in the 3rd round of this year's draft, Junior Colson. But Agent Colson did not play in this game despite returning to practice last week after being out to get, I think it was an appendix surgery, something like that. So in the meantime, it's been Denzel Perryman and second-year linebacker Diane Henley getting the starting reps, which we'll see. That could very well continue into the regular season, even with Junior Colson healthy, right? And in this second preseason game, again, it was Perryman who wore the green dot, played 100% of the defensive snaps. Henley also played full-time snaps next to Perryman. So Perriman only played the first drive, while Henley stayed in for, I think, just one more drive to pair up with Troy Dye before his night is done. So Perriman looking like the safest Chargers linebacker to bet on for IDP right now, which is what we've kind of been talking about a lot this offseason with him. He has the NFL experience. As long as he stays healthy, which has been his biggest issue over the years, he should be a really solid tackler for IDP. It was, after all, only a few seasons ago, 2021, where he led all linebackers in tackles versus expected. So definitely has potential as a great value in drafts right now, but so does Diane Henley. I would be targeting Henley over Colson. We won't know for sure until we see Colson play, but I wouldn't be surprised for the team to start with Diane Henley as the LB2 next to Perriman over Colson, just because Colson's missed so much time despite his experience with Harbaugh and with Jesse Minter. So keeping an eye on that one into the regular season as well. All right, Raiders linebackers are next. It'll be our first full season with Antonio Pierce installed as the head coach. So we should potentially be getting a better feel for his coaching tendencies compared to last year when he had to take over midseason, right? So this game started with Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo. No surprise there, but Spillane was the lone full-time linebacker of the two. He wore the green dot as well. Both players played 6 defensive drives together, so the entire first half. The defense as a whole in that first half only faced 2 third and long / obvious passing down situations, with Divine Diablo actually coming off the field for both of those situations. Now, obviously, 2 snaps wouldn't be a big deal in season. That isn't making a huge difference, but it's not so much the 2 snaps as it is the situational snaps to kind of be aware of, right? So we have to figure the Raiders defense will face a lot more obvious passing down situations in the regular season, which could include facing like a 2-minute drill offense as well, in which case Divine Diablo would likely stand to lose a lot more snaps throughout an entire game, right? So as of now, I'm not treating Diablo as a full-time linebacker for IDP, which pushes him down the ranks a bit. He's sitting at about LB51 right now for me. There's just some safer options for snaps ranked ahead of him. Spillane is really going to be our IDP target in most formats, with Diablo potentially only a deeper league play as well. Okay, I've saved the most interesting linebacker situation for last before getting into some other positions. The Buffalo Bills are going to be without Matt Milano for a large chunk of the season, now have to find a suitable replacement to start next to Terrell Bernard. Now, last year with Milano out, his replacement, which was usually Tyrell Dotson, did not play an every down role, which made him less IDP relevant outside of deep leagues. So there's still some risk of that this year, especially considering they have some viable state safeties that can pitch in and fill in the void on passing downs. But with that preamble out of the way, a new contender for linebacker snaps has appeared, and his name is Joe Andreessen, a UDFA rookie linebacker out of Buffalo. Andreessen, he started this game and he wore the green dot in this game next to Dorian Williams. Both Williams and Andreessen played most of the first half together. Both were full-time roles as well. So Williams did wrap up his day first near the end of the first half, while Andreessen stayed in the game with Deion Jones into the early third quarter before Andreessen's night was done. Now, obviously, wearing the dot, playing a full-time role with the presumed starters while Matt Milano is out should be perking up the ears of IDP managers, but there's also two ways of looking at this, since we don't want to overreact too much in the preseason. The first way is kind of knowing that Buffalo as a team is aware that Dorian Williams, he's not going to be wearing the green dot with Bernard in the lineup anyways. So maybe no point in putting that on his plate in this game instead of just kind of letting him do his thing and seeing how he does in his expected role come week one, right? So it also is kind of telling that they, gave Dorian Williams the starter rest treatment first while Andreessen stayed in the game, which could also be why Andreessen wore the dot, so that it didn't need to be swapped. But I don't think that part really matters all that much. The other way to look at it is that maybe they do like Andreessen enough to give him a shot at starting week one, right? So they never fully trusted Dorian Williams in that role last season, and maybe still don't, since they're trying to figure out who else they have on this roster, with guys like AJ Klein gone, who they've relied on in the past, Tyrell Dodson as well. So trying out someone like Andreessen, who did play relatively well, like I think makes a lot of sense for them. But either way, it's one of those preseason situations where we have to kind of try to interpret it in many different ways, read the tea leaves here. Could turn out to be nothing, could be something, could be somewhere in between, right? Where it's a rotation at LB2 in Buffalo and neither guy is full time. So I'm just here to provide the data and give my initial thoughts on it, but we won't know more until week one, most likely anyways. But for now, deeper leagues, I'd at least be looking to add Andreessen. That is once MFL adds him to their player list, which he's not last I checked, but that's just kind of how much of an unknown this guy is. So somebody to be aware of there is Joe Andreessen. Okay, on to other positions now. Let's talk some defensive linemen for the New Orleans Saints. Carl Granderson was an IDP revelation last year. He was on the breakout list for me last offseason, but performed even better than I expected. He led the position in tackles versus expected, ranked 21st in expected sacks, actually delivered right on his expected sack total of 8.5 on the year. Now, the Saints did bring in Chase Young this offseason, who actually finished higher than Granderson in expected sacks last season. He does still have some pass rush ability and upside to him, despite the injury concerns. And it seems like the Saints view all three of their top edges, including Cam Jordan, pretty similarly based on how they've deployed them so far this preseason. In this game, it was Cameron Jordan and Carl Granderson that started the game, with Chase Young coming on for the lone third down on that first drive. The second drive, it was Jordan and Young, with Granderson coming on for the lone third down. The third drive, it was Young and Granderson, with Jordan coming on for the lone third down. So this was exactly what they did in the first preseason game as well. I think it likely points to a pretty consistent rotation for all three of these guys, which should at least keep them all productive, but likely limits their ceiling a bit more, especially for someone like Granderson, who was so volume dependent in his scoring last year because he didn't have amazing pass rush metrics. He put up a lot of production by default of just being on the field. He played the 11th most snaps at his position in the league. And if there's going to be, a lot more drives where he's also not getting those early down snaps, that points to regression for his tackle production as well, on top of likely regression in sacks. So he's more of an edge 3 for me this season. He's still ranked the highest of the Saints edges, but they're pretty close now, with Chase Young just behind him, and then Cam Joe as the third guy for me. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some defensive backs quickly, starting with the New York Giants, where we were hoping to get some clarity on who the starting safeties are going to be. Well, we didn't really get a great idea from this game after Jason Pinnock didn't play in preseason week 1. He did in this game, started next to Dane Belton, but it was a clear rotation at the position where beyond that first drive of Pinnock/Belton, it turned into Pinnock and Newbin for the second drive, and then Newbin and Belton on the third drive, and then back to Pinnock and Belton again on the fourth drive before all their nights were done. So Pinnock might be the safest bet. I'm just not sure how valuable he'll be for IDP in that system. So it's not like I'm willing to take a big swing to get him or targeting him outside of deep leagues. And without great info here from the Giants, it's kind of unclear who will also start between Belton and the second round rookie Tyler Newbin. I'd imagine it's Newbin, but not starting this game at least makes it a pretty big question mark, right? So it could just be a group to avoid in most IDP drafts right now. Okay, how about some more positive and clearer news for our defensive backs, starting with Jaylen Petri of the Houston Texans, who IDP managers are fully aware of from his monster rookie season where he had like 900 tackles or something like that. This he disappointed last season. It was a new coaching staff coming in, as well as some injuries. Like that regression was an easy one to pinpoint last offseason, but there's at least some reason for optimism after the first 2 preseason games, as it seems he's getting a new/better IDP deployment for DeMeco Ryans' defense. He has played primarily in the slot while also getting more box work through these first 2 preseason games, which, as we know, both of those alignments are much better for tackle efficiency than what has been his usual alignment as a deep safety for DeMeco Ryans, like we saw last year. So there is one caveat to kind of be aware of here is that Desmond King, who played the starting nickel role for Houston last year, hasn't played in these first 2 preseason games. So this could be a case where Petrie is just filling in with the starters in that role, but it's also a role he had a ton more familiarity with coming out of college at Baylor, where he really didn't have any experience playing typical safety and was only a slot corner for the most part. So it's something to at least monitor here, especially once King is back in the lineup, to see if this leads to a new/better role for Jaylen Petri in 2024. All right, last one. Another safety alignment situation to be aware of in Washington this time. Jeremy Chinn, who the Carolina Panthers did not use at all last season, which crushed fantasy managers who drafted him. Though I was reporting on that situation last offseason as well and warning folks that it was looking that way. But this offseason, it's looking so much better for Chinn, as he's not only a full-time starter at safety for Dan Quinn's new Washington defense, but his alignments are exactly what we are hoping for from our IDP safeties. He's played 57% of his snaps in the box through the first 2 games, just 14% deep, and then 14% each at slot and on the defensive line as well. So this is what got Chinn on the bounce back list earlier this offseason, is this kind of expectation, and should really help him deliver more consistency for IDP production, especially as a tackler in a full-time role with prime IDP alignments. He's now safety 12 for me in the rankings, so back in that safety 1 range for 2024, and it's safe to target him again in IDP drafts. But that's going to do it. Hope you all found that helpful, because I'll be doing it again next week following preseason week 3. Again, also have the article version of this where I look at every game, not just the top 10 takeaways, and I'll get that linked into the episode description as well. So stay tuned for later in the week for a full IDP episode where I'll be covering my offense plus IDP combined draft strategy, which should be fun. So until then, peace out.